Our message today comes from Matthew chapter 5, 27 to 37. And it's about Jesus' teachings on the Mount. The first one is teaching about lust, verses 27 to 30. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whosoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And then teaches about divorce, 31 to 32. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Teachers about vows, 33 following. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oath to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all by neither heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. To begin these three separate topics, we must break down or understand what each of them mean in biblical sense. What does it mean to lust, to divorce, and to make a vow? What is lust? What does it do or not do for us as believers? Or for that matter, humans in the overall picture of life? We will go into each one of these topics. Webster defines lust as an unusually intense or unbridled sexual desire, lasciviousness, and intense longing, craving. It defines divorce as the action or an instance of legal dissolving a marriage, separation, or severance. A vow is to make a promise, a solemn promise or assertion, to bind or consecrate by a vow. Not a vowel, a vow. V-O-W. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this lesson Jesus is teaching today. We could say that lust is just another word, and that it means nothing, and it may be so in today's day and age. But even today, according to the Bible, lust can create havoc in our lives, as a believer and a non-believer as well. It has no boundaries. First of all, let us go back to the teaching Jesus in verse 27 to 30. You have heard that it was to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it out from you. For it is more profitable for one of your members perish than for the whole body to be cast into hell. In the Bible, lust is defined as an intense and disordered desire, particularly for sexual gratification or other forbidden things. It's not just a passing thought, but a deliberate, focused longing that often leads to sin. Lust is considered a form of rebellion against God's design and holiness, and it can manifest in both thoughts and actions. Points of what lust can do and does for all, not just believers, but it is for all people, even though this is a biblical-centered discussion. Lust is a desire that is not governed by God's will or boundaries. It's a desire that goes beyond what is healthy, appropriate, or aligned with God's purpose. Sexual lust, a key aspect of lust, is the intense desire for sexual pleasure outside of God's intended context of marriage. This can involve objectifying others and focusing on the physical pleasure rather than the relationship of God's design. Beyond the physical, lust isn't limited to sexual desire. It can also involve an intense craving for material possessions, power, and any other forbidden thing. Consequences of lust is presented as a destructive force that can lead to sin, broken relationships, and spiritual separation from God. Spiritual warfare, lust is often described as a battle against the flesh and the temptation of the world. It requires actively choosing holiness and resisting sinful desires through faith and reliance on God's grace. Commentary reads as follows. Some think that it is lustful thought if lustful thoughts are sinful, why not go ahead and carry on out the lustful actions too? Acting out sinful desires is harmful in several ways. Number one, it causes people to excuse sin rather than to stop sinning. Two, it destroys marriages and families. Three, it is deliberate rebellion against God's word. And four, it always hurts someone else in addition to the sinner. Sinful actions are more dangerous than sinful desires. And that is why desires should not be acted out. Jesus wants us to guard our hearts and minds and to have proper attitudes toward the opposite sex. Jesus was not speaking of the literally plucking out your eye or cutting off your hand, but he is telling us to be watchful that we do not do the things that cause us to act in such a way that brings harm to our faith in Jesus Christ. The will of the Father and harm to those who our desire may touch physically and mentally. So we need to be careful. In other words, think before we leap. into fulfilling those desires of lust. Where is your heart today? What are you allowing it to persuade you to do? Ask yourself, is this from God or the evil one who is tempting you to go against the will of the God of Father? Are you desiring things that are beyond your needs? Is the lady next door a temptation that you have or a desire to be with? Jesus is reminding us to not allow this to happen. To the point, he is telling us what to do to avoid it so that we can enter the kingdom of heaven, even if it requires us to maim ourselves, figuratively speaking, that is, to be able to do so. In other words, to keep ourselves pure. However, should we decide not to pluck out our eye or cut off our hand, the only other two choices you have is this: to turn away from the temptation and tell the devil to get lost and leave you alone because you are God's child. Or deny God and your faith and continue down the path of no return. Because when you prefer to go ahead and sin, you are going against the will of the Lord. The other thing that Jesus is teaching us today is the topic of divorce, which also comes along with the idea of adultery and lust. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. When lust for another man's woman's spouse leads to a serious combat between the two, then legalities come into play. Because of the adultery that came from your lust for another. In the Bible, divorce is understood as a formal and legal severing of a marital covenant. It's not merely a separation, but a dissolution and of the promises and commitments made in marriage. While the Old Testament allowed for divorce under certain circumstances, the New Testament emphasizes the sanctity of marriage and restricts divorce except in cases of sexual immorality or, according to some interpretations, abandonment or abuse. Old Testament Deuteronomy 21, 1-4 outlines the process for divorce, building a certificate of divorce, including a certificate of divorce. Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, but puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house. When she has departed from the house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand and sends it out of the house, his house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as a wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. The term to cut off is used indicating a severing of the marital relationship. The Old Testament, while acknowledging divorce, also seems to restrict it, highlighting the importance of marriage. New Testament, Jesus teaches that divorce, except for sexual immorality, leads to adultery. Matthew 19:9. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. Paul also addressed divorce, emphasizing the importance of reconciling and remaining unmarried if separated. 1 Corinthians 7:10-11. Now to the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. A wife is not to depart from her husband, but even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband, and a husband is not to divorce his wife. The New Testament emphasizes the permanence of marriage, calling for faithfulness and reconciliation, but also acknowledges that divorce in certain circumstances is a reality. Marriage is a covenant, understood as a covenant and sacred promise and commitment. Hardness of heart. Jesus attributes the allowance of divorce in the Old Testament to the hardness of people's hearts. Matthew 19:8. He said to them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. This term, ervat deva, and I'll spell that for you. It's Hebrew words. ERVATDAVR. This term, found in Deuteronomy 24, is subject to interpretation, with some rabbis interpreting it broadly, anything the husband dislikes, and others narrowly, only sexual immorality. Sexual immorality, this is the most widely accepted biblical reason for divorce, though interpretations differ on the scope and what constitutes sexual immorality. Abandonment and abuse. Some interpretations include abandonment and abuse as valid grounds for divorce. In essence, the Bible presents a complex view of divorce, emphasizing the sanctity of marriage, while also acknowledging the reality of brokenness and allowing for divorce in specific difficult situations. So while you are bound and determined to desire that which you should not have, or that one thing that you can live without, you must remember there is one who will say to you, this is not where you should be or go. Your desire can lead to legal matters that may not be what you really wanted from the start, but you just had to take the wrong direction because of your desires. And here you are. Not everything you desire is what you or is need. We want just what we want. And so we follow that view or feeling because it feels important to us to do. That's how we end up in a lustful situation or a broken marriage. In some cases, breaking a very important vow, which brings us to the next and last section of Scripture of our reading today. You see, lust breaks that vow. Divorce takes that vow away. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not swear falsely, but perform your oath to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one." In our country, as in some others, we have a tradition of having a wedding vow, having wedding vows that we take toward each other in holy matrimony, as it is called. This vow is to be a yes or a no, and not a maybe, for this is this and maybe for not that. It must be a yes for yes and a no for no, as Jesus has firmly announced. In the Bible, a vow is a solemn, conscious, and deliberate promise made to God. It is a commitment to perform a specific action or abstain from something often made in a moment of need or to express devotion. Vows are considered binding and require faithful fulfillment. Vows of solemn promise are not casual promises, but serious commitments made to God or your spouse. Varying circumstances, vows can be made in various situations, such as in times of difficulty, as a way to seek God's favor or to express devotion. Hebrew word neder, N-E-D-E-R, the Hebrew word neder signifies both a vow and a votive offering. Examples: Jacob's vow to God, Genesis 28:20-21. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God." Hannah's vow to dedicate Samuel in Samuel 1:11. Then she made a vow and said, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on me, on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head." Hannah was a woman wanting a child. And Jephthah's vow in Judges 11:30-31. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Are examples of vows in the Old Testament. The New Testament, while the New Testament doesn't emphasize vow offerings as prominently as the Old Testament, the principles of faithfulness in commitments remains important. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, encourages honesty and integrity in one's speech, suggesting that a simple yes or no should be sufficient without the need for elaborate oaths. Now, I remember when I was growing up and a wee lad, my dad made promises to people, and it was a handshake. Yes, I will get this done for you. There was no contracts written up, just an agreement between two men. Today, they don't even look at the contract anymore. They're there, but I can honestly tell you in the renting compartment, they're also, in some cases, they ignore them. And you try to take it to court, and the court takes you and punishes you by not allowing anything to happen. I've been there, I've seen it, and it's not good. But to be willing to say, yes, sir, I'll do this for you. No, I cannot do this. And understand that it's just not going to happen, or it's going to happen based on your word. If we are to keep our word, vow, we must be ready to honor it when the time comes. Otherwise, what Jesus is telling us is that we should be honest enough amongst our friends and families and tell them, I know I said, yes, I would do this, but there's certain things that come up and I can't get to it. Can we work something out? In other words, if you said yes, honor it. If you said no, then you're not held accountable. When you say yes, be honorable and honest about it. What Jesus is saying is that our word of promise should be enough to balance the scales. Nothing in writing is needed. Nothing needs to be traded to confirm the promise or the vow. But Jesus is one, but just say yes, or I can do this, or no, I don't think I can handle this one. That's what he's saying here. And James 5:12 confirms it. But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath. In other words, don't make an oath. I promise you I will get this done. Just say yes. It's done. I'll be there. But let your yes be yes and your no be no, lest you fall into judgment. So what he's saying here is if you're saying yes to something and you don't do it, you'll be judged. The commentary writes as follows on this subject. As far as James 5:12 says, there are those who have a reputation of exaggerating or lying, often can't get anyone to believe them based on their word alone. Christians should never become like that. Always be honest so that to the others will believe your simple yes and no. By avoiding lies, half-truths, and omissions of truth, you will become known as a trustworthy person. And that's very important for all of us. Christians and non-Christians, you need to be honest. And if you're a non-believer, there's a way you can change that. Tell Lord, I need you. Tell the Lord, I've had enough of this. What I'm going through. Help me. If you're having problems holding on to the yes and the no for answering somebody or getting something done for somebody, God can help you change that. If you're looking at somebody else and you shouldn't be, or you need something that God knows you don't need and you can live without, it's called lust. Turn away from it. Give God the glory and come to Him. And He'll change your life from this day forward. And all you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask. You won't have to go through a divorce. You won't have to worry about lusting after somebody else, because He can walk you through it and turn you from it. The question is, are you willing to make that change? Let's turn to 583.